Hello everyone, Ron again, and in this video we're going to build on syncopation, and we're going to talk about having multiple rhythms or melodies, if you will, and pitch variation. So to have this understanding, let's think about our objective, right? The objective of this series is to describe better ways or more ideas to create interesting drum patterns when you're making a beat. So first, let's think about the character of a drum, right? And maybe this wouldn't occur if you're not a drummer, but consider a drum line, for example. You have 5 bass drums, you have some amount of tenor players or quads or quints, whatever you call them, the 5-in-1 drum. The bass drums all play their own individual notes. The tenors have, each drum has a note that is going to play, and the snares are all going to be attempting to play the same note, right? But if you think about a snare drum or a bass drum, they will only play that one note. Versus an instrument that's like a conga or a set of bongos, you can strike that drum in such a way that it will make different sounds, possibly even different timbres, right? So here's a snare drum. Each time that snare drum is played, it's going to make the same sound. But that's not the case with something like a synthesizer, and a pluck is a transient in a way that's similar to a drum, right? So if I consider hearing a bongo player in something that was generally Spanish music, or somebody playing congas, person playing congas would usually have a set of 2 of them, and therefore they will have the element of pitch variation that we're going to observe in this video. Now, in the video about composing for musical clarity, I described how when you're writing multiple elements for something, you want to make sure that they are throughout the different frequency ranges. So you can check that out to have an even deeper understanding of what's going to be happening in this video. But I'm going to expand upon the rhythm that I made in the last video. You know, originally, this video was going to be about accents and velocity, but that's not going to be the case because I would have to drum for that, and like, number one, it's like almost 100 degrees outside, so nah. And number two, I've been doing a lot of gardening, planting flowers and digging up the soil, and it takes a lot of energy. And obviously you do that with your arms. So a good tip as a musician is that you need to give your body rest, because especially if you're a drummer or you play piano or something that has repetitive motions like that, you don't want to get carpal tunnel syndrome. So that's me today, considering health, you know? So no drumming for today. We're going to look at it inside the DAW. So here goes. Now, if you remember yesterday, I created this pattern minus these 2, where I had just this one line of notes that were syncopated against the quarter notes, and the quarter notes were muted, but I left the second beat of each measure because it sounded good. And it went up in pitch, and the green notes went up in pitch. They went from C to D, and then they came back down, but mostly they stayed at C. And this one up here is playing the G. So now, as you can see, I've added more to that. And the point of this is to demonstrate not just composing for musical clarity, right, where things are in their own territory, so they're not competing for space, but also the idea that you can have multiple rhythms going on, and you can have a lot going on musically, and a person can be able to receive all of it because all of it is in its own domain. So therefore, we look here. The different areas where the notes are playing that would represent different instruments. If this was on multiple instruments, they are represented by color. So they're muted for now, and I'm going to introduce them one at a time. And you're going to see both what I'm talking about having multiple rhythms and about having a lot of different things going on, but everything staying in its own region. So keep in mind that one reason that this works is because the way the brain works is when we hear something repetitively, we tend to become used to it, right? It's like when you walk in a room and something smells either really good or really bad, and a few minutes later you don't smell it anymore. It's because the brain adapts to it and you become used to that thing being there. So it's a similar thing that happens in music, why a song can become boring when you don't introduce new elements. And so that is another thing to understand about when you're writing a song. The reason that a good song is going to evolve over time is because, in a way, we are predisposed to get bored if everything just stays the same. So that's why syncopation also is more interesting than just quarter notes, because they are very stagnant and very repetitive. But with syncopation, there is an endless amount of sort of like bounce that you can get, and you can change things up in a very unpredictable way to introduce new things. So enough talk. Let's look at the audio example for this video. Here we go. So based on this, you could understand the way you would consider writing for a musical ensemble, especially a percussive one, right? Let's pretend that each note is a different thing, right? Like a different percussion instrument. And let's say that these notes that are highlighted right now, that are really high up, are something like a clave or a triangle. And so they're going to stand out because they're very high. They're easier to hear because of how we perceive audio to the ear. And so they can do a lot, and they don't necessarily have to conform to what the rest of the beat is doing. There's like this dynamic where they're sort of just careless. They're like free. Whereas you can see that this, let's say this is a lower instrument that has a few things or a few pitches that it can play, like maybe a marimba or a xylophone, maybe a rototom even. That one is playing in conjunction with this set of notes that are from the last video. Now, when we add the ones down here, let's say that this would be a kick drum, and it's really just emphasizing the downbeat, and the bass that's there is giving it that punch. It's like an extra bit of power that's added to the downbeat so you can keep track of it. And here is a rhythm that just emphasizes a few eighth notes. It's sort of like a beat that you would see in hip hop, but it's not exactly similar. It's shifted slightly so it fits with everything else that's happening, and it emphasizes key points that are written into the rest of the main melodies that are happening up here. Because these two melodies are working in tandem with one another, and they're not fighting. They're like brothers, sort of like, or boyfriend and girlfriend, if you will. They're like holding hands. They're walking the same direction. They're equally yoked. And here you have this bass element that is sort of like their wingman. It's like it's playing these beats to emphasize where emphasis should be so that they don't have to do it. And it's adding a bit of power. And when you have these notes, it's just filling in the space because there's not a lot happening above in that area of time. That's another thing. You want to fill in musical space and try not to leave things empty. That's why you can add a lot of stuff. And it's like making a sandwich. Pretend that you're eating a burger and this main melody you came here for is the burger. But you don't want just the burger. You want bread, you want cheese, you want tomatoes, maybe lettuce. If they don't put too much lettuce, because people, they go crazy with lettuce, and it's like you have your lettuce and that's the meal, and then they just added a burger to it or something, a sandwich. It gets nuts. And say this up here is condiments, and this would be the bun because it's just stable. That's the same way you can approach writing a song. Either you want to write for different instruments and their different octaves, or you're just hungry and you're thinking about what you're gonna make as a sandwich. There's many valid ways. So everything has its own place and its own reason for being present. And even if you think about what you want the listener to experience, when I'm considering this first beat that I made, I want you to be drawn in because you like that. I want this to add something to it. And then you're like, okay, this is going somewhere. And then when I start to slowly add bass elements, you're like, then you're like, what else is he going to do? And then you're like, okay, now there's a steady bass and it's nice, but it's not overpowering. It's not taken away from the melodies. But by that point, you've gotten used to the melodies. You can go back and listen to it again to see what I mean. You stop paying attention to them because new elements are added. And I, as the composer, understand this, right? So when I make these things come in, there's a certain thing that I want you to think about and focus on. It's like when you write a book, the person who writes the book is telling a person what to focus on by the words that they pick, the same way a director is telling you what to focus on when you're watching a movie. Certain things are blurred out, highlighted, and colored in different ways for that reason. For example, historically, in cinematic cases, things will turn white when a character reaches the point where they're perceived to be enlightened at the end of the hero's journey. Things are red to show that there's danger or to show action. Things are blue because it's relaxed. And you have teal and orange. And they show you like a beach scene, usually, like a regular, calm type of place. Dark blue can convey that night is happening or that something is cold. Like there was a short film I watched named Sound, and it did something like that by Tawan Bazemore. And in that, there was a character who was going through something that was a painful memory. And during the time of the memory, when she was happy, everything was golden and it was lit. And when she was reminiscing on that, but she was in the present, things were dreary and blue because that was just how she felt. It was like she had been robbed of things that brought her passion in the past. And these are all the things that I would be considering musically if I was to write to a piece like that. I'd be thinking what instrument is going to represent that emotion that she's going to have. I would be thinking, where does it have to be? Because if they send me some footage, then our character's talking. Is there something that falls, for example? And like I said in the previous video, what's in the scenery? What are the different things that I can describe musically, the elements of whatever we're watching? And maybe this clave, in theory, this hypothetical clave up here, represents a child, because the child is in the flow of things. They're carefree, just like that sound is, and they dance around wherever they want to. These two could be the parents, and they have a slight bit of room because they're not held down. Maybe they have a job that pays and they do what they love, so they're passionate about it, but they have fun so it doesn't feel like work. Perhaps the bass represents a grandparent, like a granddad, because he's stern and he talks to the father of the family and he holds things down, and he represents the bass. He's represented by the bass element because he's powerful and steady, and he's reliable, and he's obstinate like older people are, in a good way. And maybe this could represent a brother because, like I said, that's a wingman. That's just adding on to the couple that's there. And when the brother is around, the child can be a bit more carefree that's at the top. So those are just things to think about. But my point is that you can have a whole bunch of rhythms together without necessarily interfering with one another, because people expect for your music to evolve over time, and you can put many elements into a given space without them competing, without causing a type of interference that makes one of them mask another. And you can see this is all just one instrument. This is just flex. I didn't add anything ambient. I didn't add anything that has a long sustain. All of that was achieved by this single instrument. So that shows you how far you can go when you get diverse with other things, especially if you add real instruments that are truly percussion instruments, or you add things that sustain, because they can sustain and provide a background for this jumpy melody. Maybe even when you want to transition, they can add an element of tension because you modulate to a minor scale, which is a topic for another video, because we're doing rhythm first before we do some other type of music theory that involves the scales. And for that reason, I'm not going to explain why I chose the notes I did in this video, even though at some point that's coming up. And if you watched all the way to the end and you heard all of this, I hope that you were blessed by it and that you got something from it. And I hope that it is helpful to you and you can use it whenever you are sound designing or writing music. And I thank you. And as usual, I hope that you have an awesome day. Peace.